Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, I'll stand a little bit further away from the mic. I hope the people online and everyone here in the auditorium can hear. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all, and particularly, of course, Mattia, to the inaugural lecture of Professor Mattia Marinelli, who was appointed professor in e-mobility and energy systems on the 1st of June this year. It's the first time that I have the pleasure of attending an inaugural lecture here at Risø. I think it's very appropriate since this is Mattia's professional home in our nice auditorium. Mattia Marinelli holds a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Genoa, where he specialized in batteries and wind turbines. Since joining DTU in 2012, Mattia has really become a leading figure in the field of electric vehicles and prosumer technologies. At DTU Wind, he has been heading the e-mobility and prosumer integration section, a group that grew under his leadership to count about 30 researchers. And on 1st of August this year, Mattia took a new role as head of the department's PhD school for our more than 100 PhD students. His qualifications have been thoroughly assessed and endorsed by a strong academic committee, which found him to be exceptionally well qualified for the professorship. His teaching excellence is evident from his innovative course designs, his student satisfaction ratings, not the least, and the fact that he received the department's teacher award in 2020. Mattia has supervised no less than 46 PhD students, or maybe more. The number is a few months old, which further demonstrate his commitment to academic development. Mattia has coordinated and contributed to more than 30 national and European research projects, and he has authored more than 200 scientific publications. And very notably, he's very actively engaged in public outreach. His work has not only advanced the academic understanding of his field, but also shaped real-world applications from bidirectional EV charging and battery degradation modeling to the planning of charging infrastructure and energy communities. Mattia's leadership and societal impact are profound. He's influenced policy, industry, and the general transition towards sustainable mobility across Europe. The assessment committee highlighted his strategic vision, his collaborative spirit, and his dedication to public dissemination of his research. And judging from his recent LinkedIn post, this inaugural lecture, I think, will be an excellent example of Mattia's extraordinary talent for engaging his audience. So please join me in congratulating Professor Mattia Marinelli on his well-deserved appointment. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks Morten for the kind introduction. Jakob as well for allowing me to actually have this lecture here in Riso. That was very, very kind. I feel like you know, I'm in the same mood as our PhD students getting ready for the defense. So after attending so many defenses here, then I thought, I mean, I should also have my own defense here. I know that, well, you are welcome to challenge me, of course, throughout the presentation, but it is not really a defense, but you never know. Right. Let's see if this one is, oh, ooh la la. Wonderful. So first of all, I want to thank and acknowledge the contribution of many colleagues, friends, and family that throughout the years have been basically behind most of my work and my achievements. If it's thanks to you that I'm here today giving you this presentation. So I would really like to thank you for this. Then let's move forward and let's get down to the lecture. So why are we here today? I guess that several of you are in the field and several of you probably have an electric vehicle and have a honest curiosity in understanding, okay, when can I use my car for anything that is closely related to bidirectional charging? So throughout the class, the lecture today, we will try to answer basically 3 questions. So first of all, what is V2G? So what do we mean by that? How can we use it? Why is it not here yet? We have been working on this stuff for more than 20 years now. So why are we still talking somehow on V2G up in the air? And practically then when will it be for real? Warning, there will be a Kahoot at the end. Okay, it's both for you here in the room and also for those of you following the class online. So be ready, because pay attention, there will be some questions. And clearly, we will also have 3 prizes for the winners, like we do in class. Okay, so, you know, with any technology, in this case, V2G, I've been also, me, myself, through my own hype curve on this. And, you know, when I started to work on this, 15 years ago, it was like, oh my God, I mean, this is awesome. We can use the car to charge, to discharge. This is super cool. It's gonna, solve all possible problems in the world. And then, we went through our disillusionment period, and the framework is not really clear. Regulatory, it's messed up. Standards are not ready. The economics are not always fine. The technical details need to be solved. That's never gonna work out. You can guess the third meme who is going to feature. It's again Obi-Wan Kenobi. I would say that now we are getting close to a new reality. Okay, so we are going back to make it work, hopefully. I promise you there will not be too many memes. Okay, that's basically 60% of the meme there will be throughout the slides. Now, let's move forward. I'll try to guide you a little bit through the terms that are, V1G, V2G, V2X, V2, whatever you like. The first thing is this V1G, which practically means smart charging, being able to modulate the charge. And trust me, you could think about, okay, this is very simple and trivial somehow, but behind this V1G, as a matter of fact, there has been a huge amount of work. To be quite honest, today I'll not give justice to the immense amount of work that all the colleagues and the people working with me have been putting in this V1G, because there is really a lot, okay? But today, let's focus on the bidirectional charging. So whenever we introduce the concept of bidirectionality, meaning being able to transfer the power back from the car, then we can define vehicle to grid when the power is flowing back into the grid. Then we can define a subset, which it would be the vehicle to home or vehicle to building. It's exactly the same technology that is behind vehicle to grid. The main difference is that you don't re-inject the power back into the grid. You use the power locally within your building, your households, and so on. Then we have the vehicle to load. That's a slightly different beast. So in that case, you can discharge the car, but to a dedicated appliance, not back into the grid. I would say nowadays, we can also define the vehicle to drone. It seems that it's going to be quite an interesting feature to explore. And finally, we have this V2X or vehicle 2X, which I find it a little bit confusing because it basically means everything and nothing at the same time, but it's becoming quite trendy. So now you get the picture of all the V's that we have in the system. Now, to give you the historical context, as I mentioned, V2G is definitely not something new. We have had since the early 2000s, as a matter of fact, a technology that was the AC propulsion e-box coming from California that was actually vehicle to grid ready. We have had actually one here in the lab until a few years ago. You can see that's a DTU branded one. And clearly the Nissan vehicle, so the Leaf and the NV200 has been behind most of the demonstration that have been carried out so far. But now let's get a little bit also deeper in the technology. We often hear this term AC and DC V2G. So what's the difference? I mean, the battery inside the vehicle is always DC and the grid is always AC. The key difference is where the conversion from DC to AC is taking place. We typically define AC V2G if the conversion is taking place inside the vehicle by using the existing onboard charger, which clearly needs to be capable of sending power back into the grid. So far, this has not really been too popular, except the AC proportion car standards were not there to actually support this type of technology. There are a lot of intrinsic advantages, and the most important advantage is that it's potentially very cheap, because as a matter of fact, you can rely. I'll use the mic. I'll use the mouse here so that also people online can follow. You can basically rely on the onboard charger to discharge the vehicle. This one that we find here that we normally call charger, as a matter of fact, is not a charger as such. It's just a glorified socket that enables communication and power flowing back. There is no conversion here. So this is potentially very interesting and potentially very cheap. Grid compliance is a little bit tricky because in the end, you need to make it compatible with all the places where the car could possibly travel. The DC V2G instead rely on the fact that you don't use the onboard charger, you use actually an off-board charger to take care of the energy conversion. Clearly, this is a little bit more costly because you need to install something that has also some power electronics inside to convert the power, but it's also a little bit easier from a grid compliance point of view. Now, if you ask me which one of the two will end up dominating the market, my take is that for small power, and when I mean small power, it means a handful of kilowatt, I think the AC V2G should definitely be the way forward. The DC V2G instead will offer more capabilities for higher amount of power. Now, let's give also some context in terms of potential, and now I will come with my beloved back of the envelope calculations that many of you like and some probably dislike a little bit. But again, I want to put a frame on what's the potential here. Okay, so if we look at the European level, the overall electrical consumption over here, it's 2,800 terawatt hour. And if you boil down an average number throughout the day, that's around 7.7 terawatt hour of electricity. And then if you are under the assumption that all electric vehicles in Europe, electric vehicles, passenger cars, and small commercial van are fully electrified, assuming an average 60 kilowatt hour of capacity, you have this amount of energy, 17, that you can play with. Now, the key question is how much of this 60 kilowatt hour of the battery capacity you can actually utilize, the user will actually allow you to utilize for a bidirectional service. That's the key point. If we go with a conservative number, let's say only 10% of this capacity, then we already get a consistent amount of reserve that is around 1/4 of the daily average consumption in Europe. So it can be actually a substantial amount of energy. Then you get the drill. If we increase the amount of energy that we can pull out of the vehicle, then the number increases. And if we get to the most extreme situation where you utilize the entire capacity in your battery, then you can basically cover 2 days of consumption. So that's quite a consistent number. I also like this number because, as a matter of fact, if we look a little bit at production of solar and wind in Europe, historical trends that you see here in this bar plot, I mean, production has been increasing over the years. But if you look month by month, the sum of the two is fairly constant. So on a monthly basis, they are safely reliable as a source of energy. Clearly, the challenges with wind and solar come more on a day-to-day, weekly variation. So if you take the well-known Dunkelflaute, which is not a German rock band, but it's basically the expression that is behind an absence of wind and solar in a dedicated area for a certain amount of time, then the last one that took place last November, that was lasting 2.5 days. So I like this number because it means that we are on the same range. Again, under the assumption that I can fully utilize the capacity of all the cars. Now, moving forward, I would like now to identify a little bit the driving factors and the potential showstoppers for this technology to actually take place. So I got inspired by Michael Liebreich article and lecture on the energy transition, and I have identified my own 5 superheroes and 5 horsemen for the large-scale V2G deployment. And throughout the next slide, I will unpack all of them. But I would say the 5 accelerating factors that are behind the large-scale deployment of V2G are electrified road transportation, meaning that when it comes to road transportation, electric vehicles are the de facto choice going forward, not just for cars, but also for everything that is commercial, buses, trucks, heavy duties, and so on. That's out of question. Renewables, they are getting cheaper and cheaper. Solar, especially, is becoming cheaper and cheaper, which is good. Downside, too much solar, you may end up in a situation that you have too much abundance of energy. And in that sense, unless you are willing to spill that energy, the vehicle to grid can come in support, as a storage system would do. China's role in electrification, clearly they've been behind large-scale deployment of solar and also of batteries. The intrinsic function that vehicle to grid provide, which is enhancing resilience by having a buffer for energy at home. And finally, the OEM adoption, OEM being the car manufacturers, who I have to say, so far have been probably the one a little bit too reluctant to embrace this technology. But we see now that they are finally getting there. The 5 challenges would be the OEM gating. And what I mean by that is that even though some OEM are embracing the technology, not all of them are. And even those that are might not be willing to embrace it entirely in a fully interoperable and open system. Other challenges, regulatory patchwork. This is a common issue in different domains. Again, looking at European level, we clearly have 27 different countries, more if you count non-EU. Everyone is, of course, making its own rules. Clearly, that makes development a little bit more challenging. Business cases complexity. So far, it was always a little bit tricky to understand what was real business case and what was just hyperinflated PowerPoint fancy business case. I'll give you some numbers just to explain that. Interoperability clash, too many standards, too much confusion, too much complexity. Hopefully, we are getting there now. And finally, probably my most favorite, battery wear and warranty. So the concern that my car will, the battery in my car will break down or not work properly. Now, there has been tens, if not hundreds of development projects taking place in Europe and elsewhere. Clearly, we have been quite active on this as well. The Parker project that Peter led a few years ago was definitely one of the first, most important, definitely in the Danish context, development project, where we actually tested and analyzed a lot of what could work and could not work in terms of bidirectional charging. We also follow up with another project that I was responsible for. And in that project, among other things, we also focused on analyzing and quantifying battery degradation. One question that we were often asked, okay, guys, this works. You can discharge a car. What about degradation? Will that impact my battery? Will it destroy and so on? Look, if anything, I would like you that you leave the room today with 3 key messages when it comes to battery degradation. The first one, battery degrades. You have to accept that. Every technology does. Human degrades. So there is nothing about that you can do. So yes, it will degrade. Peace. The second news, which is a better one, is not degrading so fast as we were fearing and some expecting. The third, which is even a better news, most of the degradation in the battery comes simply because time is passing. Usage, when it comes to an electric vehicle, is a minor contributor to the degradation of the battery, meaning that just by normal driving, you will not affect the lifetime of the battery. So just use the car for something else other than driving. That's the key message. To give you some numbers to, the cars that you see there from the utility Frederiksberg for tuning, we were monitoring those cars, okay, and doing repeated testing to measure the capacity. Those cars that at that time were not very big in terms of battery, okay? They were just 24 kilowatt hour, small capacity compared to today's term. They were performing a very intense frequency service. They were discharging 1 cycle per day, which is a lot. Normal usage nowadays, you will discharge 1 cycle per week. And even at that time, 1 cycle per day, cycling was still not the dominant degradation factor in the battery. If you don't believe me and you want to question that, you are more than welcome to do that. We have clearly been doing a lot of work, research, and publication behind that. I've been also measuring the capacity of my own car over the years in the lab. And, the measurements are comforting somehow. I have to mention my car, I don't do any V2G with my car, not because I don't want to. To give you some background story, 3 years ago, actually, I was contacted by a well-known charging manufacturer, which I will not disclose, who promised me a bidirectional charger for a trial. And then after 6 months, they withdrew from the agreement because they say, okay, we're not going to develop this one any further. So I was very hyped about getting my own V2G charger, navigating a little bit, under the radar, because strictly speaking, I would not be allowed to operate a bidirectional charger connected to the public grid. But that's a different story. Anyway, the problem didn't present itself, so that's fine. Another fun story. The first measurement that we did in the lab, that's basically the green circle here, looking at state of health. That was done in December 2020. That was during the second lockdown. But I just got the car, and I was very eager to get the measurement when the car was new. So I asked Kresten if I could please go to the lab and get a dispensation, and he was very kind to grant me that. So that gave me the chance to measure the capacity of the car at the very beginning. Now, let's move forward. Otherwise, we'll spend the whole time here on battery degradation. Interoperability. Now, this slide is extremely dense and crowded of information, but that also to give you a little bit the overview that it is a complex manner. I like to refer, to make the analogy with the Tower of Babel, right? A lot of languages and so on. And it is pretty much like that. So the communication between the vehicle and the charging equipment, there have been a lot of standards behind that. We had initially the CHAdeMO one that was basically designed to operate bidirectionally, but then it was clearly kicked out of Europe. And the replacement that came were not really ready to perform that. Yes, you could do that, but you had to a little bit, bend the rules a little bit and hack it. Finally, after many, many years of development, we are to the point where we have one standard, this 15118-20, whatever means for you, which is fully equipped to enable this bidirectional operation. And this is the first piece. Another important piece is actually the communication between the electric vehicle supply equipment, the one that we normally call the charger, and commercial operator, Spiri, Monta, Clever, Ion, you pick one. This is not ready yet, I have to tell you. So this one, we are still in a situation that the current version that is implemented everywhere will not support bidirectional charging. We need to have a newer version, and this newer version is not mandated yet. And until it's not mandated, then it will really be difficult to have this implemented. Now, we are moving forward, and as I said, OEM are embracing the technology. So there were several announcements over the last 12 months. BYD, Renault, BMW, and Volkswagen were definitely one now promoting a commercial solution where you can actually use your own car. The thing is that those solutions come in a bundle way, meaning that their car, their charger. You cannot exchange things. And I mean, fine, it's okay. You know, it's a way to start, you know, slowly get the ball rolling. But ideally, that shouldn't be the end result. Some OEM, for instance, are also limiting a little bit how much you can play with the car. So, for instance, this one, 4,000 hours of operation and no more than 10,000 kilowatt hour of energy that you can flow back and forth. China, which as always does things on a large scale, then they just recently started 30 large-scale pilot projects in different cities. So that will be very interesting to see what's going to happen there. I have to mention there are several initiatives also at international level. One of them is the IEA Task 53, whose objective is actually to ensure this interoperability. So one of the end results of this activity will be to make sure and to demonstrate that you can use one car, different chargers, or same charger, different cars, and still perform the operation. Now, moving forward, other, let's say, driving factors for the large-scale deployment of V2G, as I mentioned, passenger cars are becoming electrified, and that's fair enough. But also buses and trucks are becoming more and more electrified. We see that sales of buses and trucks are getting bigger and bigger by the month. And also heavy duty and long haul transportation, nowadays, they are becoming more and more electrified. And we just read recently also mining equipment, that's also becoming electrified. That beast has a 3,200 kilowatt hour battery. So it's not a small one. That does not mean that it should be doing V2G, but the point is that there is more and more push for electrified technology when it comes to road transportation. Now, I'll give you another number so that you can digest that. If we look at how much electricity we are consuming out of the overall energy that we consume, I would say that in Europe, Denmark, European Union, and so on, is not so great. Okay, so it's around 20%. Could be much better. Has to be much better. In that sense, Sweden and Norway are far ahead, with almost 50% of energy consumption being electrified. And you know, if we take the overall road transportation in Europe and we switch it to electrical transportation, we can get a 10 extra point of electrified consumption. Clearly under the assumption that we power this unit with hydro, solar, and wind technologies. So there is a huge potential. And again, this potential is also not peanuts. I mean, that's 120 billion euro of saved oil import every year, besides saved gigaton of carbon emission. And if you think that this number is too ambitious, then again, look at China. They just hit 30% of electrified energy. And then you could argue, yes, a lot of that is coal-based. Sure, I'll take it. But the increase of wind and solar in the recent year is going to go up so much exponentially that in a few years, they are already peaking now CO2 emission. In a few years, they will start to go down and displace all the coal power plant. And again, just to give a look at China, we also have to acknowledge clearly that also from a battery manufacturing point of view, it is clearly China behind that. So from if you look at the whole supply chain, from cathodes and anodes to manufacturing of the battery, car manufacturing, and car sales, China clearly dominates the setup. Europe and North America, of course, are a little bit pushed on the sideline. And to be quite honest, I find it sad because people, executives, they should realize that they should not spend money on the wrong technology. Hydrogen, for instance, for road transportation. 20 years ago, it could have made a little bit of sense because batteries were so expensive that even though the physics was terrible, that people knew that already back then you could still make it up because the price of the battery was terrible, the capacity of the battery was terrible, and so on. But after 20 years, things have changed so much. And I find it sad that they are still wasting billions of euros on a hydrogen car in 2024 and 2025, while they should spend those money for something else, like electric vehicles. You want a practical example? This is the lithium-ion battery price over the last 15 years. Prices have been declining 95%, inflation adjusted, okay? With the steepest decline in 2010, and they still keep on declining now, except for a small bump due to the supply chain issues after the COVID pandemic. And, you know, I take again my beloved Leaf as an example. Over the years, the prices for the same type of car, okay, this one, I take the Leaf because, again, that was the first, you know, mass-produced car that was not too expensive. Back in 2011, they used to cost 34,000 euro and, you know, a tiny range and battery capacity. Nowadays, it still costs the same, and this is not even inflation adjusted. So it's actually got cheaper if you account for inflation. And the capacity got 3 times larger. Now, let's get a little bit looking now at use cases. So what can we use the vehicle-to-grid and vehicle-to-home technologies for? I've prepared this pyramid, which ended up being a pagoda more than a pyramid. But if you are familiar with the Maslow pyramid of needs, then there is basically this layering of needs from the most fundamental to the, let's say, more superfluous, so to speak. So I thought to do the same exercise when trying to cluster all the possible services that an electric vehicle could do under a bidirectional performance. So I've been taking into account potential revenue stream from the service, how much energy is service is requiring, how much this is going to constrain the usage of my car, and how easy this is to implement. So this is a little bit based on my own educated guess and collective knowledge that we have gathered over the years. So at the fundamental level, we can put the, you know, the basement, I need to drive my car, meaning that whatever you're going to do with charge and discharge, always make sure that you have a minimum amount of energy to perform the basic function that the car has been bought for, right? Then the easy pick, in my view, it's behind the meter operation. So the one that I called at the beginning vehicle to home, meaning charge with local photovoltaic production or cheap energy and use that energy not to hedge and speculate into the market, but just to cover what you need locally. That's the easiest thing. You can do it whatever you like. You don't need to have any kind of actor in between. The economics is good. And that, in my view, should be the first thing to put forward. Backup and emergency power. And, you know, these days with all the threat and geopolitical issues, it's probably becoming quite a fundamental facility as well. Then going up, balancing services and frequency regulation. So participating into the market, that's definitely a nice pick. We had a few cases over the last few years, and I'll give you some examples. Ending up on the congestion management and local grid support. This is nice in theory. In practice, it's a little bit more of a mess to get this one implemented. And finally, I see as a least interesting the energy arbitrage. But, you know, nowadays that the government decided to remove the energy tax, actually, probably this one could become a little bit more interesting. But for the time being, I'll put it here. Now, some concrete examples, and I'll give you a simple overview here, okay? So what you see here on the left side, you're probably familiar with that. It's the cost of electricity, hour by hour, retail price for a given day, okay? That was a day in January. Cold day, very expensive electricity in the evening. Now, how would a V2H use case work? You would basically charge during the night when the electricity is very cheap, and then discharge and cover the consumption in the evening when the electricity is very expensive. So the intrinsic value is in saving an otherwise expensive consumption. Some of you could argue, do you really need to consume power when the electricity is too expensive? That's a valid point, okay? And this is also to highlight there are a lot of intermediate solutions that are more effective rather than, you know, going over with a vehicle to grid. But unless you want to eat a cold salad that specific night or sushi, then you definitely need a little bit of energy to cook your pasta. 1 kilowatt hours more or less is what you need for a meal pasta, okay? But 4 kilowatt hour of energy, just to get a number in mind, that might be a little bit too much. And this delta of price might be also a little bit too large, okay? That might not be representative for an average day. In principle, that's 1,000 euro of saving per year. It's not little. And then you could say, okay, but then you are degrading my battery. No, I'm not. Besides, it's your battery. You are not degrading your battery because this amount of energy is less than what you drive on average every day. So seen from the battery point of view, this is really nothing, okay? The battery will not really perceive that. Now, we have been carrying out, David has been behind this investigation, a more thorough analysis, okay, rather than just taking that snapshot. So in the moment that you take into account more realistic prices and more realistic usage condition, you can still, in Denmark, okay, 200 euro per year of saving, again, based on this behind-the-meter operation, with practically no increase in the degradation. Similar operation, but more looking at frequency disturbance services can also be realized, for instance, with fleet. So in this case, we were analyzing the electric trucks, that the one that they use in Copenhagen, okay, the refuse trucks that they use in Copenhagen to collect the garbage. They are not V2G ready, but if they were, they could use those, considering the requirement that they have, you know, to drive around the city, and still achieve 3,000 euro per year per truck of saving of revenue based on frequency disturbance saving. And, you know, without going into the detail, frequency disturbance is not an energy intense service, okay? You need to interrupt your charge and then provide a boost of energy a few times a day. So that's not gonna affect a lot. Practically no increase in degradation, and you can save quite a lot in terms of usage. Other people, there is this nice study from Fraunhofer. They did something similar, looking at different countries, okay? They estimate that in sunny places, okay? So if you use, instead of using cheap energy from the grid, you use cheap solar energy that you have in-house, and you are Spain or Italy, you can end up with savings of 800 euro per year. So the potential is there, as a matter of fact, for this type of operation. A few other examples before we wrap up. The frequency service, as I mentioned, we were quite involved in this demo at Frederiksberg Forsyning for quite some time, and this is an example of operation back in 2018. At that time, the bidirectional chargers there were performing a fairly simple operation. That was a frequency regulation, normal regulation, meaning that the basic principle was charge or discharge based on how the frequency is changing over time. So the car was continuously getting power in and back and forth from the grid, okay? So that was a lot of energy flowing there. Interesting from an economic point of view, because the service was paid by availability and it was actually generously paid, but the energy flow was actually a little bit not so nice from an energy efficiency point of view, because turns out that for the type of implementation that they used to have, the battery was operating actually most of the time at very low power values. And as it's often the case, power converters tend to have very low efficiency when the power values are relatively low. So as a matter of fact, a lot of energy was burned, which translate into a loss, as a matter of fact. Now, that does not mean that there are no alternatives to this type of operation. We have been coming up, Harris has been coming up actually with a lot of alternative methods to provide a different type of dispatch. Moving forward, getting to present day, we have been working, Christian and Christopher, been working quite a lot with newer cars and newer chargers that we had. Just to give you an example, chargers are getting definitely better. But again, it's always important to keep in mind how you are going to use the charger. Because, for instance, if you get a 10 kilowatt charger, but then your use case is often requiring 500 or 1000 watt, you will always be in the situation that you will always hit very low efficiency values. So it's also important to keep in mind the requirement of the use case and the size of the bidirectional converter, because otherwise you will end up in a situation that, again, you burn all the energy that you try to save by charging and discharging. Now, getting to the last case, congestion management and local grid support. Does this make sense? To a certain extent, it does. Again, let's give some context here. So this is a snapshot from the well-known web page from Serious and Radius, where you can actually check loading in your area. Okay, so that's where I live. We are 200 families here, and so far we have 32 EVs in the households. And this is the type of consumption that we observe during the peak at night. Okay, so a little bit more than 200 kilowatt. The transformer has a capacity of 630 kilovolt ampere. So you could say there is a lot of room, okay, before we end up hitting the capacity of the transformer. Yes, there is, but things are moving fast, are moving quite fast. And if we continue with this trend of new registration of electric cars in less than 5 years, we will most likely experience overloading. What does that mean? It means that the fuse at the transformer will trip and then no one is going to charge. That's it. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but a lot of people will be a little bit disappointed. Now, the interesting question here is that could the vehicle-to-grid application make sense? So would it make sense from the utility point of view to say, okay, I'm calling Mattia and say, I'm going to pay you handsomely if you are going to inject 10 kilowatt for this hour tonight instead of consuming? Yeah, it might work in theory. The practical implementation is a little bit more tricky. You need to have information, real-time information from the transformer. The utility has to end up and do this kind of cherry-picking agreement. So that's going to be a little bit cumbersome. So again, the interesting aspect here is probably, would it be possible through other means to avoid that this peak end up from realizing in the first place, rather than trying to patch it up once the peak is happening? So that's an interesting thing to move to analyze forward. Now, rounding up, when is this, you could say, finally gonna take place large scale? I would like to tell you today, and I would like to tell you, come to our charging hubs next to Building 330, and we are gonna test your vehicle for providing vehicle-to-grid services. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So things are moving, but there is still some activities that needs to be completed. Standards, we are finally getting there, but they are slowly progressing. User experience, it must be something that the user can understand and can operate in a simple manner, or at least if the car manufacturer or the charger is doing that on their behalf, there should be clear expectation on how they are going to use the battery for what. Warranty condition also for the battery, and data transparency. Grid operator confidence, reliable performance, and secure communication. This is something that must happen. Otherwise, cybersecurity is going to be a big issue. Technical readiness. The equipment is getting better and better. Vehicles, more and more vehicles are, at least on paper, vehicle-to-grid capable, but they should also be unrestricted in their usage and not having this kind of bundle solution. Another important issue is not just about the battery, it's also about the onboard electronics. If all the electronics in the car is designed to operate a certain number of hours, and then we are going to use the car for more hours, not for driving, but for another service, the electronics there must also be able to operate for that many hours without breaking down. So it must be included in the design criteria for the equipment. Energy management is going to be also another big thing. Doing simple charge and discharge, it's fine, but that's not going to take you that far. The beauty and the interest is more in being able to manage the charging and having a management system that can actually optimize the operation of the car. Market design and fairness, I would say Denmark is doing pretty well. Other countries need to catch up. So having smart meters, for instance, is a very important requirement. Having also dynamic pricing scheme in place is also a very important requirement. We need to reform taxation, so taxes need to be removed from electricity. So in that sense, it's very good what the government just did now. And then finally, we need to be able to give inclusive access for individual prosumers and aggregators. That said, I've closed it for now. You are welcome to give me a hand and get ready for the Kahoot. Good. So now, while you open the mobiles, I'll set the Kahoot up and running. Also, those of you online clearly can follow, and then we will have questions afterwards. Now, let me do the magic here.